people who love what they do coming into social spaces like this and sharing their passion, what they've invested their lives in. So tonight we've got Bob Redwater, who's going to be talking about Memoirs of an Edinburgh Poacher. And we've got Derek Howden, who's going to talk about Placebo. I'm going to tell you a little about the card tonight, just to start the night. On the back, please take one away. You'll find the Facebook and the Twitter and the email and the website. There's lots of stuff on there. There's other free events that get advertised on the free events page. And if you want to share anything through an article, please get in touch. The symbol that you'll see is an oak leaf, and there's a story behind this. And I was reading about the Greek philosophy of xenia, which is the philosophy of hospitality. I love some of the ideas that are in it. This is about social space, about learning through our friendships and who we meet in our private lives. And there's a story called Baucis and Philemon, and it starts off very wrathful. Zeus decides, right, humans totally pissed me off, not lived up to my expectations, and Zeus decides to come down, decides to wipe out the human race with a flood or a fire or whatever. There's different versions. But before he does, he thinks, well, I'll have a wee wander through the land and see what I'm doing first. And he disguises himself as a beggar, and he walks up to the door of Baucis and Philemon, to a couple who are older. They've not got much money, and they open the door and they go, oh, come in. They usher him in. You must be tired, and they sit down. You must be cold, so they light a fire. Or you must be hungry, and they go to kill their only goose. And at this point, Zeus goes, wait, surprise, I'm Zeus. Don't do that. There's no need. But what you've shown me is there's something really beautiful about humanity. And I'm not going to destroy it. And I thought that's a nice symbol. Now, he granted Baucis and Philemon a wish, and both together they said, well, when the other dies, I want to die too. And on dying, he granted them the wish, but he turned one into the oak tree and one into the linden tree. And famously, they grew entwined. So when you look at the oak leaf, I'd like you to think of xenia, hospitality, and the welcomeness of strangers. And, well, that's a little about how the ragged has formed itself. With no further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Bob Redwater, and we get to listen to Memoirs of an Edinburgh Poacher.
Thanks. I have to apologise before I start. I'm unaccustomed to public speaking, and if you look at the title, you understand why. Most of what I did, I kept to myself, and when I brought food home, it was food that I'd caught myself, whether it was fish or pheasants or rabbits, anything else. And with my lifestyle, and I've spent most of my life as a hunter, I would ordinarily be referred to by others as a poacher. But I see myself as a hunter because I was doing what a lot of other people have been doing for thousands of years. On these islands, and people have been hunting and following the ways of animals in the same way I've done for many, many years. And the animals they were hunting, rabbits, hares, deers, whatever, have probably been following the tracks of their own ancestors. And one of my, I suppose, enemies in a way, I've met many of them over the years, are gamekeepers. I'm particularly fond of raptors, birds of prey, eagles, buzzards, whatever. I've got a particular liking for them. And often when I was out hunting in places, I'd be on land that was owned quite often by the gentry. I mean, they had gamekeepers, and their gamekeepers, I would often find traps, spring traps, that had been set. And they were usually set near the pheasant pens. And one of the commonest ways to use these traps was to set them on top of, and whenever landed on these traps, normally they were covered and hidden with a bit of moss on the top so the bird didn't see them. And I've seen several birds caught in these traps, where buzzards, hawks, of all kinds. And when I used to find these traps, I was really quite angry by what I saw these gamekeepers were doing, because they were being used illegally anyway. So I used to take those traps and put them to my own uses. And it was a very nice way of recycling, because what I did, I used to bait them with maize, and sweet corn, you know, the hard stuff that people would use to feed the pigeons with. And I found a really great way of catching pheasants that belonged to the keeper who had set these traps. But I used them in a way that they wouldn't catch things in a casual way. I would set them so what I was after would go into them. And one of the places I used to sight them was underneath yew trees. And the reason I used to sight them there was because they were usually dry. And when you looked under these trees that had thick cover, the ground was very dry and sandy usually. And if you found dips in them with pheasant feathers, then you knew you weren't wasting your time and that there were pheasants visiting these places, these sites. And the other advantage in setting the traps in such places, a gamekeeper wouldn't see them, because the places I set them, I would be going under on my hands and knees. So you'd really have to be looking hard to actually find some of these things. And I bagged a fair number of pheasants doing that. So if you just give me a minute, the thing that really annoyed me about gamekeepers as well is the other thing they control raptors with is putting poison on. Now I was on Morton Hall Estate just 2 weeks ago, and while I was there, I watched a buzzard flying into a tree with a half-grown rabbit. And the buzzard sat holding the rabbit in its feet, and the rabbit was dangling down. And eventually it slipped from its grasp and just fell onto the ground. And I was with another person, another dog walker, and we just kept very still so the dog didn't bother the buzzard. Hopefully it would go back and pick it up. And while we were watching this, there was a chap, an old chap came along with his dog and asked what we were looking at. And we told him we'd just seen the buzzard flying in with the prey. And he stopped and he told us an interesting story about his background. He was a toxicologist. He was a government scientist, and his job, he was working up in the Angus Glens at that time. And while he was up there, his job was to identify birds that had been poisoned, that were brought in by hill walkers and other people. And he was explaining to me the extent of birds that had been poisoned in that area. It was in Angus and the Highlands. And he said a typical year that he had, and all of these boys had been poisoned, the birds. He had 6 golden eagles, he had 2 sea eagles, and the other bird he had, a much rarer bird, was an eagle owl. An eagle owl had probably been escaped from somewhere. People do use them for hunting with. And he mentioned that in all these birds that he identified poisons, when he was opening the gut and looking at them, nobody was ever convicted of that. They knew it was gamekeepers that were doing it, putting poisons down. He said in the old days it used to be strychnine that was put down, and birds would die almost instantly when they're taking strychnine. And that was handy for the gamekeeper because he would actually pick these birds up and go and bury them and get rid of the evidence. But the poisons are being used now, and they're still used if you follow the news and see what's happening with the kites, the red kites up in the Highlands. I think there's been 16 at least that have been identified as being poisoned. But the kind of poison used on these birds is very slow acting. So again, often the birds will die on another landowner's estate. So you can't actually convict the man who owns the land because the bird may have come from somewhere else. So the gamekeepers even now are still managing to get away with doing the same thing. And the reason doing that is because some of them take pheasant poults, not all of them, but it's pounds, shillings and pence. And sometimes the gamekeepers are being encouraged to do this by the landowners. And they know if they get caught, it's not going to be a custodial sentence. It'll be a fine, sometimes a hefty fine. But the landowner is quite prepared to pay them some minor investment for him. So they're not caught. If I can say something about my early childhood now, and how I got interested in nature, that's me on the left-hand side. When I was a kid, like a lot of other boys when I was brought up, egg collecting was a big thing. Kids did that in primary school. And usually lads, I think the lassies were just a bit less insensitive, regarding destroying a bird, for the sake of a shell. But a lot of the boys that I knew collected eggs, and they were wasted lives, just blown through empty shells. And they were kept in something like a shoebox, with a bit of cotton wool or something in it. Anyway, I soon got fed up of collecting eggs. And we used to have a school nurse that came in, and it was a regular checkup. And almost all the wee boys that came in had terrible scratches on their hands. So we were identified as egg collectors, because a lot of the birds' nests that we got eggs from thorn bushes. Anyway, when I was a kid, I used to go for long, long walks by myself, watching birds and animals. And I just loved being out somewhere quiet by myself, just watching nature. And for me, hunting something at that time, it wasn't something I was really interested in. I was just interested in watching birds. And one of my first pets, I came from a big family, and one of my first pets was a crow, because we weren't allowed to have a dog. I came from a big family. There was a couple more kids not on that picture. And my mum said she had enough mouths to feed with what we had, so we weren't going to have another pet. So anyway, I came home with a fledgling crow one day, and the crow was called Kim. And anybody that knows about crows, the crow family, they're highly intelligent animals and birds, and they pick up stuff really quick, and they're really cunning and clever. And the crow that I had he was a fledgling and wasn't able really to take care of himself much when he was younger. And we used to put a bath out in the back garden, and he would bathe in the bath. Normally when a wild bird bathes, it's looking around for signs of danger, but because he'd been hand-reared, then he was not all that smart at that stage in his career. He was still young. And while he got himself soaked and he was on the garden, the local cat from the next door came in and sneaked up on the crow and was about to jump on him, but the cat held back, and he got a nasty peck in the face, on the nose, and the crow. And we managed to get the crow and put him somewhere safer. But ever since that day, he hated cats. And when he was able to fly around the house where he wanted to go, whenever a cat came into the garden, he would attack it and go down, squawking. And he would chase it through all the back gardens like a sparrowhawk. So the cat had been running from alcohol to get away. And the crow used to see him dipping, following the line, and you could see where the cat was. He had some other habits as well that weren't very endearing to the neighbours. He used to go around in the early morning before people had taken the milk in. And in those days, the milk bottles had a silver top, and they were left on people's doorsteps. And they came up and took the milk in later. But my crow really enjoyed a drink of milk. So he used to go around the houses and the doorsteps, and he used to stick his big dirty beak through the top and siphon off about an inch of cream. But he never ever knocked the bottles over. He would just go from bottle to bottle, having a drink from each. And it was unlikely that the neighbours would think blue tips had done it, because they were culprits, but they got very little out of the milk bottles and the fresh cream. There was another thing the crow did. The crow used to, he liked to sit on my shoulder, and he used to mutter in my ear, and pick up the wax within. I think as a small boy, I probably didn't wash my ears very well, so it was something to work on. But the other thing he liked to do, he used to sit on my shoulder, and he used to look into my eye, and he used to tweak my eyelashes. And I never saw that as being a particularly dangerous thing. But my mother was actually quite alarmed. And to him it was a bonding thing between us. And I was able to take this crow to school on occasions. It was a bit like show and tell. But I had a really nice female teacher that taught us English. And she would let me bring the crow in, and I would stick him up on the blackboard. And we used to work in silence, but the crow used to just doze off. And anybody that's ever seen a bird, wild or otherwise, they have these peculiar eyelids, and it's like a double eyelid. They work in two directions. So you can see the crow blinking, and this colour coming over his eye, and he would snooze quietly while we got on with our work. And then when I used to take him home, lunchtime, he used to fly with me, but jump on my shoulder for partnering. And you can imagine what my school blazer looked like. My mum had to sponge it down when I got home. The crow had left Anyway, getting back to the fear about crows and eyes and stuff like that, and the reputation they have. When I was in my early teens, I was up in the hills, and I saw way in the top of the hill, it was Hillary Hill, there were two crows just on the skyline. And the way they were kind of dipping and coming down, you just suspected there was something going on, and it was worth checking out and having a look at it. And when I got up the hill far enough, there was an old ewe lying in a bog up near the top. And she was lying on her back with her legs flailing in the air. And she was absolutely sodden. And I mean, she was old and didn't look all that great. Anyway, I thought I should try and help and do something. So I went up and I managed to roll her over and get her on her feet again. And I didn't think she was going to go anywhere. She couldn't stand, so it's just sat, but at least the right way up. And I thought I'd done a pretty good job and walked away, and I was happy, the crows up to mischief weren't going to do anything. And I walked a considerable distance away and kept looking back. And I saw the crows back again. And this ewe had rolled over on her back. So I started walking and then running back, but the crows were already around the head. And they were running at her sideways, like a dance, coming in, dodging about. And by the time I got there, both her eyes had been picked up. And the sheep was dead. But it was quite a pretty horrific thing, to see. This was a long time after I'd actually had the crow as a pet. And what happened with the crow? I had the crow for about 2 years. We used to get another crow coming on visits. And it would come and meet mine. There was an ash tree in the back of the garden. And they used to meet together and then sit very close together. and eventually the clue disappeared. I was absolutely heartbroken. And my mother just explained it to me. She says, well, wild things have got to raise families as well. So if you're going to lose a bird, I suppose even a pet, a faithful pet like that, it was probably a better way of losing it than another way. Something nasty or a death or somebody shooting it and the like. So just give me a minute, I need to glance down at this occasionally. Yeah, so how did I start hunting? I didn't have other birds. I also had a pet jay, and I had a pet owl, tawny owl. The jay had rather a sad end as well, because we'd gone away on holiday, and a neighbour of mine had offered to look after the bird and feed it while we were away. And we'd been on holiday in North Wales for a couple of weeks, and I really didn't want to go on holiday because I was so attached to this bird. And I was worrying about it, particularly after losing the crow. Anyway, when we got back, the bird had disappeared. It wasn't anywhere there. We asked all the neighbours. And eventually we heard from a paper boy that came into the house. He'd heard this squawking from a shed in the street around the corner. And he went and had a look, and it was the bird, the jay. So I went around just thinking, no problem, we'll go around, tell the guy in the house, I didn't know who he was, that, you know, I've come back on the holiday, I would like my bird back. And what I did notice, looking through, there was a dusty window looking onto a workbench inside the shed, and the jay was in there, and his wings had been clipped. So all the feathers on the front part of his wing had been cut off, and he looked really bedraggled. And I was knocking on the window, and the bird was coming flying towards the window. And I went and knocked on the door, and there was no answer. And I went back later, and there was still no answer. And then when I went back for the third time, this guy answered the door, and I said, that's my bird you've got in the shed. He said, no, it's my bird. I own it. And I tried to explain to him, and he told me to mug it off. And just didn't want me hanging around. So anyway, when my father came home from work, my dad went round to see the man, and the jay wasn't there. The shed had been locked, so I couldn't have gone in and taken it anyway. And he denied all knowledge of it. And I just had this horrible feeling that that bird had come to a sticky end. I mean, I couldn't understand why he would do that. It was so cruel. And it was a tame bird. It would fly. The crow and the jay had flew free. And when I came home and shouted, they came down for a feed or whatever. Anyway, getting to the hunting bit and how the prompting started. When I was in my mid-teens, like a lot of kids, I quite fancied myself getting a gun, and I got myself an air rifle. And my father hated guns. During the war, my dad had been he was an anti-aircraft gunner on the convoys in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. And his boats had been sunk twice by German U-boats. So anyway, he wasn't having any of that, so I got the gun anyway. And I hid it. I always had to hide it, so my dad never found it. And I started to go out and look for stuff to shoot that I can eat. And the first thing I shot was a wind pigeon. And then I got a duck after that. And my mum wasn't all that bothered about the stuff I brought home because we can eat it. And being from a big family, it was quite tasty to have something that, you know, duck or game, something I've not eaten before. So my mum was fine, and she taught me how to clean birds, pluck them, singe them, to get the fine feathers off them. And she was quite happy with me doing that. And she used to, when I got a small bird like a pigeon, I didn't have to share that with my brothers and sisters. My mum would make a stuffing, a nice tasting bird stuffing with lemon or something in it, and especially for me, if I got something bigger, and we would share it with the rest of the family. When I left home, I went to art college, and the art college I went to was in Salford, and the house that we lived in was an old Victorian house, really run down, and we had mice in the kitchen all over the place. We had rats in the basement, and there was a street light by a bus stop in the garden, and the rats used to come out. So sometimes she used to pop rats. And when we couldn't catch the mice in the trap, so they stopped taking the bait. And there was a couple of occasions when I shot a mouse, usually on the breadboard. Anyway, that needs a good wash before. Anyway, getting back from my student days, my first job, and I was settled in Edinburgh with my wife, Ellen. We'd been together for a couple of years, and before we got married, we had one child. We started life in the Grass Market and then moved up market to Marginal. My first job in Edinburgh, when we were living on Margaret Park Road, was on the Edinburgh Corporation buses. And they proved to be quite an advantage for somebody that wanted to be a hunter and catch food by poaching or whatever. So I was on the 41s, and I got to in Edinburgh quite well, just travelling around on the buses. And we would, on that particular route, part of the route was on the Water of Leith, and it was finding new places just from the top of the bus. And I was able to go and start shooting ducks down on the Water of Leith. And sometimes I was in fairly built-up areas, but the banks were quite leafy with trees, and you could, if you went early enough, you could get out and about and get yourself a couple of ducks in the morning. Getting home and getting the bus back, I usually had big pockets in my coat, as a lot of poachers do. And the rifle I had could be taken into two parts. And I had a piece of string laminate under a long coat. And with a coat hanger, so you carried in the butt and the barrel on the other side. So I could get on the bus with my game and my rifle quite well hidden without being seen. Some of the other places I used to hunt as well. Loads of places around Edinburgh, and particularly golf courses. The Great Hills, Morton Hall, behind the zoo. There were loads of places where there were rabbits, pheasants, partridges. Edinburgh had, because of the green spaces, had a fantastic amount of wildlife, as well as birds, rabbits, hares. The hares at that time were much more common. And I think in an urban environment, probably what I was doing didn't help with propagating the species, particularly with hares. But I think a lot of these places were buildings encroached on the land. So the green spaces around Edinburgh got smaller as more houses were built in these places. Sorry, just give me a minute. It was at that time I was really interested in archery, and I was at the library quite a lot, and I was always interested in tribal hunters, Aborigines, American Indians, people that were just clever at catching food and being able to feed their families and their tribes. By understanding animals and birds and be able to catch them. Anyway, archery became a hobby for me, and I started to make my own bows. And the best wood for making bows was from the yew tree. And to find a tree with a stave or something big enough and the right length suitable for making a bow was really difficult, maybe 1 in 100 trees. Sorry, I'm going on too much about the archery event. I'll get on to something else.
No. Remind me of the slide we're on.
Right, sorry.
Just give me...
Sorry, this is quite important. Just give me a minute.
What are great stories.
It was probably this that I was particularly interested in the Memoirs, the Queen's Archers. So I thought I'd quite like to have a go at that myself. And this was in the Memoirs, quite in the open. But when they were practicing, it was screened off. So I thought I'd like to have a go at that, but I'll probably come later in the day straight right hand, so there's not too many people on there. So I think the next shot you'll see is me on the Memoirs. I think most of you recognise George Square in the main library behind. And I used to practice there fairly regularly. And also I used to throw boomerangs there. So what I used to do is just to set a target up from about 70 yards away. But so I wouldn't be doing anything particularly dangerous. I set myself up standing under a tree and set the target so I could see anybody coming. It was usually late on a summer's evening. And if somebody came along, then I would stop shooting arrows. And sometimes people wouldn't see me under the tree, but they'd walk by and they'd just see arrows stuck in the ground. And if I saw somebody walking over, then I would just pick up a boomerang and throw that until this person had walked safely past. But anyway, there was one night, and there was one guy coming over from George Square, and he was a really stocky, fat guy, really well built. And I must have been in his 20s, something like that, quite a rough-looking guy. And he had a greasy overall on, and he was carrying a carburettor under his arm. And he had black, greasy hair slicked back and a big pair of boots on. And he started to walk towards me, so I just stayed still and I was holding a boomerang. And he just came right at me and he said, "If that thing touches me, I'll rip your fucking head off." So I just about cracked it, as you can imagine, with this guy coming at me. And then he started laughing. And he said to me, "God, you're a bloody walking ethnic museum." So he was asking about the stuff in made, about the bows and the boomerangs and everything. And his actual speaking voice, it was a Glaswegian accent, but his actual speaking voice was quite posh, just hint on the West Coast. So anyway, we walked along and we parted on good terms. And then when I went to work the next day, I worked for an advertising agency at that time. And I was telling somebody at work about my close danger with this guy. And he went, "Oh, that's Robin McMillan. He does voiceovers for us." He said his hobby is doing up American cars. And he says, yeah, his stage name is, I can't believe it, his stage name is Robbie Coltrane. So that was my first meeting with Robbie on there, and I was scared stiff. And I found out what a really funny guy was at that time. And we did use him at the ad agency, and he could do American accents. He could do anything. You know, he could come in and sound like a gangster. He wasn't on TV then. He was just doing kind of radio stuff. But I think most of you guys know who he is now. He did extremely well. Most of my poaching in the early days was done with a bicycle. And I had an old-fashioned, very heavy, hefty bike that was quite hard to pedal up hills and all. It just had 3 gears, Stubby Archer gears. And when I used to go out in places in Edinburgh, I had the rifle, which is in a green case. The bicycle was also painted green. And I used to go out early in the morning, and I was aware that carrying a rifle, if somebody could spot it, I would like to be stopped by the cops driving through Edinburgh to get to one of my places. So I had 2 leather straps, and I used to strap the rifle along with crossbar. And occasionally police cars did go past, but they wouldn't see the gun at least, and I didn't get stopped. It was while I was working at the ad agency, I was introduced to a young chap who was a friend of somebody that worked at the agency, and his name was Jack. His nickname was Jack the Ferret, because one of his hobbies was he had ferrets and he used to go hunting with them. And the person that introduced me was convinced that Jack and I had gotten quite well because we were both kind of hunting and more or less in the same places. Yeah, that's Jack, yeah. So anyway, I met Jack, we met for a pint in a pub, and we got to know each other, got talking. And Jack didn't do much shooting, but his passion was kind of ferrets, absolutely loved them. So he invited me to go ferreting with him, and I says, where do you go? And he says, well, behind the zoo, and sometimes inside the zoo. So we went up there one night and took the ferrets with us, and there was a hole under the fence in the zoo. So he managed to get in a couple of the enclosures, and one of the enclosures had red deer in it, just a couple. So he showed me, we went in there, we set the nets on the ground where the warrens were. And the advantage in going to a place like that at night, the grass is very short, so you're not going to lose your net. And because the animals have grazed, there's nothing to catch in the nets. But the ferrets were going to run out. And this particular deer, we went there a couple of times, it got quite used to us. And while we were kneeling down, putting the nets down around the warrens, this deer, particularly friendly deer, used to walk up behind us and just nuzzle our necks. And it was just very, very friendly. Anyway, we got all the rabbits in that enclosure, and we tried the one next to it. And that was a big mistake, because that was where the zebras were. And I was kneeling down near the fence, and we just heard this thump behind us, and I just saw this big stripy arse and two flying hooves. And anyway, fortunately, they didn't connect. So we kept out of that place. But we did sometimes catch smaller rabbits inside the zoo. And occasionally, we used to get a police car came through. And this was at night time, and I don't think they were looking for anybody special. They were just doing a tour around the zoo. You know, it was making a thing that they did. And the car that they were driving, it was a Morris 1000. And some of the older folk here, I remember it was called a panda car. So there's a nice kind of link with the zoo present day on that score. Yeah, that'll do for the zoo. The only thing I didn't mention about the zoo was there were timber wolves there at that time. And once you got inside the enclosures, you could move around inside the zoo. And these timber wolves, particularly when there was a full moon, I mean, they really did howl and sing. And there were 4 of them in there. And sometimes we used to stop by and see them and get right against the fence. And if we got a small rabbit, then we would fling it over and give it them as a treat. And it was dead, but still warm and fresh. And we was expecting there would be some sort of fight over the rabbit, you know, when we threw the rabbit over. But they never did fight. It was always the same. And whether it was a male or a female. But it was always the same wolf that came along and then just picked the rabbit up. And then it would just gulp it maybe 3 or 4 times and swallow it whole. And the others just stood and watched. And you know, just accepting that. When they regurgitated, 2 of the wolves were smaller in size. So I don't know when that would regurgitate it and they would get a bit later, we never found out. But that wolf howling on a full moon was just absolutely fabulous. You know, there's some things in nature that make your hair tingle in the back of your neck when you see or hear something like that. And we became friendly with those wolves, and I think they knew us. And we were hard pressed to walk past if we had some rabbits, not to give them one. You know, it was a kind of bond with them. It was just a nice thing. The other one talking about ferrets, and the ferrets bred, and the ferrets are young ones. This is my daughter. The first ferret that we had, we adopted one from our friend Jack the Ferret, from one of his young ones. And the first one we had we called Bramble. And anyone that's handled a young ferret will know why. I mean, they're needle-sharp claws and they're really kind of scratchy when you pick them up. And obviously this was going to be a killing machine for us, to catch rabbits first and get some nets. But my daughter was, I think it was, she liked to have a ferret rather than a doll. And one of the first things she did was knitted a woolen scarf for it. I don't think I've got a picture of that, but it was a little scarf that the ferret wore and ran around with. But the good thing was that my daughter handling the ferrets. A ferret, when you use it for hunting, the more it's handled, the gentler it is, the less likely you get nipped or bitten by them. And it's not good to get bitten by a ferret because they're needle-sharp teeth, and you're likely to get an infection of some sort if you're bitten. It's a deep bite. So anyway, handling the ferret became quite tame, and I got myself a few nets. And what we used to do as a family, we used to go at the weekend and get the bus out to East Lothian or somewhere. And the ferret was carried in a creel, a fishing creel. And we had a few nets. And we used to hunt in woods, along the beach, other places. And we almost always came back with a few rabbits, a couple of rabbits anyway, and 6 nets. And it was really fun having ferrets in the family. And they would get the run of the house. There'd be in a cage outside, and they had this fantastic smell. It was kind of a sweet, musky honey smell that they had. And later on, we got a ferret that had young ones, and we found it quite difficult to catch enough to keep it fed. And the one particular occasion, somebody gave us permission to take the ferret on this land because we needed to get some rabbits. And it was in a garden down near Peebles. So we had gone down there in the early morning, take the ferret with us, and a few nets. And the person that had the garden and this beach hedge, they showed us there were 3 rabbit holes there. So we thought, well, that'd be a cinch, dead easy. We'll just go there, 3 nets down, get whatever's there, and then we'll be away. Anyway, what we got was something quite unexpected. The ferret we had at that time, she had young ones and she was still lactating. Anyway, she went down the hole, was down for ages and ages. And when she popped up again, she was carrying a baby stoat. It was just about the size of a sausage, chapelata. And it was, the colour of it was very dark chocolate brown. And the eyes were still sealed. So we looked at this and picked it up. And then the ferret went down again, and it went down 3 more times. So we had 4 baby stoats in our hands. And obviously we wanted to put them out of harm's way and put them back. So we picked the ferret up, put them back down the hole, and we wandered away to go somewhere else. And then my friend and I at the time said, I'll tell you what, let's go back to the warren, and we'll get one of the wee stoats, and we'll put it in with the others, because the mother's going to feed it. I mean, see, the mustelid, it's the same family. And we thought, well, I'll adopt it. Anyway, we went back, put the ferret down. It was no surprise, really, if you thought about it. The mother had been back and moved the whole lot to safety. Anyway, we had a couple of rabbits to take back. And then I was desperate as the young ones were getting hungrier and hungrier. I thought, well, boomerangs, that'd be another way to get some food. Because at that time in the month of July, on the meadows, there's a lot of elm trees there. And they shed the seeds in the month of July. And what you used to get almost at the time of year every year, you would get street pigeons coming from all over Edinburgh. And they would come specifically onto the meadows just to feed all the seeds there. And there would be flocks of 100, sometimes more. So I was always interested in aborigines and made boomerangs just as a hobby. And I thought, well, aborigines, when they hunt birds, they always hunt in flocks. And in Australia, they hunt where there's water holes. And the water holes where you get large numbers of flocks of pigeons. So I thought, well, I'll give it a go. And I went there on my bicycle, and it was early morning, because it was an experiment I didn't really want anybody to see me doing. And I got off the bike, and I walked towards the pigeons who were still under the trees. And I threw the first boomerang very low parallel. And when you throw a boomerang like that, there's a very obvious flight pattern. It goes in an L shape. It goes forward, and then straight up. So I had 2 boomerangs, and the first one I threw to put the flock in the air. And as they came up, I threw the second boomerang, and it went right through the flock. And it hit a bird, and it came down, stone dead. And I took the birds came down again and started feeding, and didn't seem particularly bothered about one of them had gotten whacked. So anyway, I went home and I tried it out, and they gobbled the bird down, pigeon, but they were getting big and needed to get more. I was working at that time, so on the way to work, I used to cycle over the meadows, and I got quite confident in doing it. And what I was doing eventually, I was cycling right towards the birds as they came up, and I was throwing boomerangs to the moving bike. And sometimes I brought down 2 birds with 1 boomerang. And I was doing that quite regularly, and the ferrets were mainly living on pigeons, street pigeons. And I was getting a bit cocky and a bit overconfident. And there was one morning, it was early, and I was on the other side of the meadows near the Simpson Maternity Hospital. And again, I was on my bike, cycling past in full view. And I whacked a bird, and right in front of the Simpson Maternity. And there was a heavily pregnant woman standing at one of the windows, and she'd seen me do it, and I heard this scream and looked up, and I thought I'd better piss off and get away pretty sharply, because I'm sure somebody would be phoning the cops, and they'd be looking for, at that time I had a beard Caucasian on a bicycle, decimating the flocks with Aboriginal weaponry. So I stopped doing it after that, and then it was just throwing them for fun. Sorry, that's my boomerang. What's next? Yeah, a dog. Excuse me, sorry. My family were really keen to get a dog, my 2 kids. That's them. Have you missed one? You might need to go back for it. Yeah. Okay, that's it. I wasn't too keen on getting a dog, because at that time my life was hunting with a bicycle and a rifle, as well as fishing. So I thought about it, and I had 2 younger friends, and they were a lot younger than me, and they weren't settled family men. And they reckoned me being a settled family man with a house and children, I really needed a dog. And yeah, it was the ideal pet. And we'd be able to catch game, and we'd be able to catch stuff with a dog, like the ferrets, without using a weapon. And I wasn't too keen. But anyway, I was over in Peebles one day with a friend of mine. I think I'd been ferreting there. And I'd seen this tinker coming along the road. And he had these 2 beautiful lurcher dogs. And they were so graceful, they were just trotting along this country road, beside him. And there was just something that looked absolutely lovely, seeing the kind of dogs they were, racy, long-legged, beautiful dogs. And that kind of planted a seed in me, and I thought, maybe I'd think about a dog, but not right away. Anyway, the next week, this chap that lived in the border said, I know this guy that's got some great dogs and the lurchers, really fast dogs, catch rabbits, hares, and everything. I really thought you had to, check it out. So I went round to my mate's house. He phoned up the guy that had the dogs, they were puppies, and brought them round. And he had an egg box with, I think there were 4 puppies in there. And I looked at them, and they were really kind of cute. You know the way puppies and kittens, you just, even men, you get kind of soppy and kind of googly, and you want to pick them up and pet them. And anyway, I was petting this thing, and I was thinking of all the reasons I didn't want to get this dog. And I said to him, well, how much are they? And he went, 35 quid. And it was quite a long time ago, and it was a fair bit of cash. So I just said, well, I haven't got the money. And my mate, Jack the Ferret, standing beside me, he said, I've got the money. And he says, I can give you a short-term free loan. So I was kind of stuck. And my mate had 2 pals of me, they were making me, go on, go on, go on. So anyway, I coughed up the money, got the loan, and they gave me this wee box to bring it back. And my wife and kids had absolutely no idea about this. And I was, then I I got home with it, and I was kind of worried about walking in with this dog. I was always kind of didn't want a dog, and I thought, God, what am I going to say when I walk in? Yeah, I walked into the kitchen, feeling really kind of sheepish, and then they kind of looked at the box and opened it, and my daughter saw it first and just whipped it out and arms around it, cuddling it, seeing this cute little puppy. And anyway, they were dead chuffed. And my next job was, right, I'm going to train this dog. It's going to be a hunting dog. It's going to be incredibly obedient. It's going to do what it's told, when it's told. So anyway, I went to the library. I knew nothing about dogs. But I got a book out on training, and it was probably the wrong book. And what it suggested in the book, to teach a dog to a command and calling its name. It was quite small, but really fast. Is you get a long lead or rope, and you throw a ball, and you send the dog away and call its name, and then pull on the lead. I mean, it's a really stupid idea, and I didn't kind of twig. I was going by the book. So anyway, I didn't have any rope, but the dog had this broad collar, so I had some parcel string. It was about 30 yards long. So I tied one end to the dog and I put the other on a loop. And it was a loop that I put my finger through it. So I'm holding it, and you can see what's going to happen, right? So anyway, I threw the stick or a ball, whatever it's called, and the dog went off. And before I had a chance to actually shout the dog's name, the loop just tightened on my finger. And it was absolute agony. My finger started to turn blue. I couldn't get it off. And there was nobody else in the field. It was that day where there was nobody around. And I managed to get a bunch of keys out, and the smallest key on the ring, I managed to shove under eventually. But I left this big white mark with a small thumb. And I shouldn't have left it in there. And I thought, well, it'd be much safer to try something else. So I had the string. I thought, well, the obvious thing is just get a big, thick piece of wood and tie it on there and stand on it. And that's fine. I'm not going to get snared on any of my digits. It's just, that'll work fine. So I'm standing on this big piece of wood, sideways, threw the stick, the dog went away, and the dog went away at such speed again that this big thick branch just pulled my feet forward, and they pulled them so fast and forward at that speed. I was like in mid-air, lying horizontal, and then it came down and landed on my back. And it's pretty soon you feel your lungs bounce, and your head hits the ground. So I had a headache, a fat finger. And then I thought, well, nobody's seen me. And then I looked on the side of the hill, and there's a guy coming down there, a bird watcher, and he's been watching the whole thing with binoculars and singers. So anyway, we used more other methods. There's actually quite a sad story with this dog. When he was 10 months old, he died suddenly of fits. And his hunting career, as young as he was one rabbit. And that was the only thing he ever caught. So he had a kind of short life, one rabbit and one dog. And we found out afterwards that the guy that had sold the dogs and the puppies, all but one of these puppies had died for the same kind of thing. And the guy that had bred the dogs, I think, was, he had quite, it was considered kind of a ne'er-do-well in the place that he came from. And the only puppy that did survive, one that had been taken away before it was 8 weeks and been more hand-reared rather than staying with the mother. So that was a very, very sad day for us. And by that time, I was really a big dog fan. And we were all really upset and decided we would get another dog, and it was to get another lurcher and train up. And I think by then, even at the age I was when we lost him, I felt a bit more confident, in training by that time and understanding dogs. So we saw that in the paper, and there was 2 lurchers, pups for sale, and they were for sale in Lockerbie. And so this is before before the crash, and before the bombing. Anyway, we got another dog down there. It was a fine-looking dog. He was 3/4 greyhound and 1/4 border collie, and that's the next dog. Yeah, that's him. Fox, his name was. We called him Fox because when we were driving home, it was a long haul and it was dark by the time we got back to the house in Lockerbie, all the way down to the border.
Is that in the Pentland Hills somewhere?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
I recognise the bump as the highest point, which is
That's right.
It's called Law.
Yeah.
And you're on the track that comes up from Belerbo.
That's right, yeah.
Crosses the hills that ends up somewhere on the A.
That's correct, yeah. You're not a landowner, are you?
Well, I like that road. And at 449 metres a high hill, Hare Hill, Brunette.
Yeah.
I think it's called
Right, so anyway, with this.
I've got it right.
Yeah. Anyway, with this. It was called Fox. We were discussing the name when we were driving home. And when we got just into Edinburgh, this fox ran out the park gate and ran in front of us across the road. And there were 4 of us in the car, the 2 kids, my wife and I. And we thought, well, we're going to call him Fox. And that's how he got his name. Fox turned out to be a fantastic hunter. He kept us fed with rabbits, hares, all sorts of stuff. And he was a very gentle dog as well. He was a big, powerful dog. And we hunted regularly with him. Yeah, that one was on the Penton Hills right now. Now, this dog, when he was a puppy, he was a hunter right from the start, and the garden used to hunt flies, bees, and butterflies, and he used to make nice dens himself in the herbaceous borders and flatten all these lovely plants and flowers that we have. Yep, there was another couple of incidents with the ferrets during the winter time with this particular dog. He'd been trained. We only had 1 remaining ferret when we got this dog, and after a bit of hassle between them, we discovered that they got on fine together, and they were able to hunt as a very good unit. And having a dog and a ferret together, we didn't have to rely on nets. It's very time consuming putting nets down, but when you've got a dog that is trained to work with a ferret, and we did a lot of hunting with the pair of them. And there was one winter in Edinburgh where we got on very, very deep snow. And Black Fatal at that time, I went up there at midnight, and everything was covered in a deep blanket of snow. And it was lovely walking up there. It was midnight, there was nobody else on the hill. And I went up there with the dog, the ferret and the creel, and a sledge that the children had. Because I knew that if I went up there, I'd get an easy route down, so I took the sledge with me. And the snow was very deep up on the top. And on the north side of the hill, next towards the castle, there were half a dozen holes, rabbit holes. And when I went up there, I could see there was something in them, because when you see rabbit pee in the snow, it's bright orange. So you know there's something been there quite recently. And I put the ferret down, and within 10 minutes I had 3 big fat rabbits. And they all had this fantastic winter coat, which is perfect, for making things and using the skins. My wife quite often used to make mittens out of rabbit skins when they were really good quality and thick in the winter time. And I came down that hill on the sledge down Observatory Avenue. I think most of you probably know that. And the dog was running beside me, and the ferret and the creel and had 3 rabbits in the bag. And it was Drake just sitting down there, and very unlikely I would get done for poaching there. And whatever the bylaws said you could not do that. There was I think it was about the same time of year. I was up with the dog, and there was been a really deep freeze, and the deep freeze had lasted for about 3 or 4 days. And I was walking past the allotments that go past Edinburgh, up on Blackwood Hill, and I noticed there was a crow sitting on a tree near the path, and the crow was sitting there, and having a crow of my own and knowing their ways and thoughts and the like, I could see this crow looking down at something on the ground. And when I got level with the tree, underneath was a woodcock, and the woodcock was standing underneath, and it just didn't look in good shape. And I walked up to it wondering if it was going to fly away, and it didn't fly, it just stood there. And I could see where the ice and snow was. This long beak and big holes, I couldn't get through the ice. And when I picked it up, the keel bone was very, very thin. And it was obviously starving to death. And I don't think it had long to go. And I reckon if I hadn't been there when I did, the crow probably would have killed it, I think, quite easily. So I took it home, and there was in the garden, the compost heap was frozen over. So I couldn't get anything to feed it with. So we decided on a tin of dog meat. And we got a tin of dog meat and some egg yolk, mixed it up. And it took 3 of us to feed it, force feed it. There's my wife and my daughter. One of us had to hold it. One of us had to hold this long heat open. And we managed to get stuff down its beak and force feed it with a chopstick to make sure it got down. And we had the bird, it started to look a bit better, a bit healthier every day. And we had it, and we kept it for 3 days. And we fed it maybe every 2 or 3 hours, and as late into the night as we could, because the night feeding. And on the 2nd day, we got it into the kitchen, and it was running on the skirting boards. And it actually ran over the dog that was lying by the radiator where he used to sleep. And then on the 3rd day, it flew around the kitchen, and it poked a hole in the polymole as it was going round. And by then, the snow was melting, and we thought it's probably the best thing to do, let it go. We've been keeping it in a box with paper and water, so it can drink, so it can rest between meals. And after seeing it fly in the kitchen, and the keel bone had fattened up, wasn't quite so thin. So anyway, on the 3rd or 4th day, it was at night, I took it out to where I'd found it, up near the allotments at Edinburgh, and I stuck it under a beech tree in the dark, just left it and walked away. And 2 days later, I was in the same area with the dog, and it was a place on the other side of the bridge from the hermitage, and there were all gorse bushes there, very thick cover, and the dog was in there, and 2 woodcocks flew up, and they flew over the wooden bridge there, new bridge there now, and they actually won them next night to Shamrock. I used to get a lot of birds that the neighbours brought into the house, and they brought them in where their cats had caught them, and quite often the birds were alive, and I bet you bedraggled some of them. But the strangest one we ever got, it was a swift, and I'd never seen a swift close up before. They are incredible birds, they are so beautiful. They have an incredible wide wingspan. And I think most of you know that they don't actually settle except to nest. They sleep on the wing, and then they're there the whole time. And what they have is very, very small feet. And their feet are tiny, and they can't really stand. But they're just made for being in the air and flying. And I shoved that, it was unconscious when I got